All right. Hello, everybody. I think we're going to get started today. So thank you for joining us. My name is Taj Aitlausin. I'll be your moderator today on our journey to discuss all things data. So the topic for this panel is CCA data challenges and opportunities. And during our discussion today, we're hoping to touch on three key topics that are in the panel description. One is data access. The other is big data management, and the third is advanced modeling capabilities. I'll try and remind you and the panelists of those topics during our conversation today. This is how we're planning to conduct this panel. So we have a panel of 4 speakers, and each speaker has been asked to quickly do a 5-minute introduction with a slide that's touching on their organization and some of the data themes that are important to them. I'll also be doing a quick introduction as well at the onset. During that period, we encourage the audience to use the question feature on the platform here to submit questions of interest, and we will do our best to field those questions once we're done with the each speaker's presentation. So we look forward to a spirited conversation. So please feel free at any point in time to submit your questions in the Q&A portion of the application. We've also prepared some questions just to get the conversation started. And we've already received a few questions actually ahead of the panel, which we'll make sure to address. We have an exciting panel today. Joining us are Josh Brock, who's Vice President of CCA Commercial Operations at Calpine Energy Solutions. We have Rebecca Fang, who's a data analyst at Silicon Valley Clean Energy. We have Scott Rigglesworth, who's a Managing Director of Operations and Strategy at Ascend Analytics. And then we have Fred Taylor Hochberg, who is the Director of Modeling at the CalCCA. And again, I am Taj, and I manage technology and analytics at East Bay Community Energy. So I'll start with a few things about data and analytics at East Bay Community Energy, and then pass it on to the speakers. EBCE is the CCA that serves customers in the county of Alameda, as well as in the city of Tracy. We expanded recently to a few other cities, which brings our total customer count to something close to 640,000 customers, with an annual load of over 6,500 gigawatt hours and a peak demand of probably 1,300 megawatts retail. About 60% of our load is commercial industrial, and the rest 40% is residential load. The slide that you have here just provides you a quick overview of the activities that EBC has engaged in terms of data and analytics. We've put together a team called the Technology and Analytics team, which I head, and its purpose is to provide expertise, infrastructure, and capabilities to the organization so that we can deliver data-driven insights and support continued innovation at East Bay Community Energy. On the team side, we've assembled both energy and data experts that have deep data capabilities in data science, data engineering, and in software development. With this team, we've also built an infrastructure on an integrated data, what we call an integrated data platform using Google Cloud technologies. So it leverages state-of-the-art data management and processing resources that are available through cloud technologies, and it obviously provides a highly secure, scalable, and flexible architecture that comes with the fact that it's, again, a cloud technology. It enables us to really run very cost-effective, large-scale data processing for significant cross-functional analytics. Again, the 3 topics that we were going to touch on today are data access. In our case, we've tried to address the data access challenge by making sure that all data sources are centralized in one common data lake in this cloud platform. And we have significant capabilities to process continued additional data sources, which we're adding to our system on a regular basis. We've tackled the big data challenge, which really comes from all of the metering transactions and of the smart metering infrastructure. again, by using cloud solutions that allow for very rapid, scalable, cost-effective analysis of big data sets. And finally, modeling has been an area of focus for us. While classic modeling is typically done from a top-down perspective, where you make certain assumptions about certain groups of customers, or you treat customers in aggregate at certain levels, like a rate class or a voltage level. With the ability to run these types of models from a bottoms-up perspective, we really open up a lot of opportunities. So because we're storing and managing the data in these types of modern infrastructures, we really can do true bottoms-up aggregation modeling of both our load, our supply, and do the types of segregation analysis that we'd like to do. I'll touch real quick on some of the platforms that we're using. Again, I mentioned the Google Cloud Platform. We also are pursuing the implementation of Salesforce, and I'm happy to talk more about that, so that UBC has its own customer relationship management solution to support all of our needs within the organization. All right, and with that, I'm going to pass it on to our next speaker, Josh.
Thank you, Taj. Appreciate that, and great to finally get a chance to be on stage, as it were, and talk to the community here. So, as Taj mentioned, this panel is really going to be all about data. And for my part, as many of you know, Calpine Energy Solutions works as a data management, billing, and customer service partner to a number of the CCAs here in California. So our look at the data space really comes from the ground level, or the operational level. And so I'm going to functionally look at and sort of provide perspective from there. And it's a function of talking about sort of what we're seeing in the data access, and then the related elements of that around quality that impact some of these other important things that we're talking about on this panel. So I think that at a fundamental level, the way we look at it is really data is the lifeblood of any energy company. And this is especially true for an organization like a CCA, where not only are you serving energy to your community, but you're serving your community with programs and services, and you are functionally an extension of the community as being a public agency. And as such, really, the need for accurate and timely data is critically important, and it's only going to grow as we move towards greater renewable integration, decarbonizing the grid, and really the deployment of targeted products and services for our community, like electrification or the various initiatives and efforts that many of you have going on. So with that in mind, I've sort of just bucketed the challenge and opportunities into sort of three things, although I think there's plenty more that we could talk about. The first one is, on the challenge side, that this access to timely and accurate data feels perennial. It's an issue I've been working on and dealing with since I joined Calpine. It's an issue that I remember dealing with in the 2000s when I worked for the city of San Diego, and we were trying to get load data to use for programs that we were running through our local government partnership with our local utility there. So when you have just so much time that's been invested and continues to be invested on this issue, it can feel like something that's never going to be overcome, that this rock will never get to the top of the hill. But we are seeing, there is incremental improvement that happens over time here. We've seen some recent things with the Edison area, just using one example on the customer list, but we really need to see the pace of that change accelerate if we're really going to get to the bigger picture priorities that data is designed to drive. And I'll also just note that we're also continuing to feel the impact from the lack of investment from the utilities in modernizing their operational infrastructure. CCAs have been around for 10 plus years. The legislation itself is now at its 20th anniversary. But I think our utility counterparts are still struggling with modernizing their operational infrastructure, which is critical and core to the delivery of data to entities like us. Second is sort of the disparate or unequal treatment that we're seeing that we believe is dampening innovate. The fact that we have different data formats delivered in different timeliness with significantly different quality depending on which IOU territory you're in is a challenge. And while currently there isn't a CCA that serves, I stand corrected. Our colleagues at Central Coast are now serving both an Edison and PG&E territory, and I think they're experiencing that. And I know that many of you, as you look to expand, that becomes a real operational challenge. But it also highlights that you get these differences sometimes just from different interpretations of the regulatory construct that was put in place around the data access, or what was required or not required. It also means that we as a community are spread out, where we're trying to all move towards one solution, as we all have similar goals, but it means that we're having fights and battles in different regions to solve for the different issues that we experience there. And the last one is that data quality continues to drive business risk. So we know that it's sort of fundamental that you need solid and reliable data to manage the core and critical activities that come with being an energy provider. And you just can't take the data at face value and assume that everything is going to work as expected. That approach leads to poor outcomes. It's the classic garbage in, garbage out type of thing. And so you need to have a really robust control and exception environment to manage those risks and ensure that the data that you are using to manage your core and critical functions like forecasting or procurement or any of these other important modeling or even on the engagement side, you need to make sure that that data is good and solid, and it does require significant time and personnel investment from those of us who are on the ground doing that. And we also know that it's not just the data itself that we're getting, but we also know that the utility-driven errors associated with their systems and data do create risk for the business, whether it's participation risk because of a failure to deliver bills accurately, for example, that then causes a bill shock at a later stage for a customer and forces an opt-out, or if it's a failure of more of a systematic level where you get a lack of, payments aren't getting delivered, invoices aren't being presented, all these other sort of things that you have to always manage, control, and they take time and resources and can distract from the larger, more important activities I think we're all trying engaged in. Now, with all of that said, that's maybe the baseline to look at where we're at right now. I think we do see some real significant opportunities down the road here. Some of it are things that I think we're all working on. For our part, CalPine is really looking at science-based approaches backed by really good data to inform how we support and engage customers through our customer service platforms. We're already, each of you and all of us are collecting a lot of data that maybe we're not utilizing or could utilize in different ways that relate to consumer behavior. It can be appended and further amended with other useful bits of information such as census or socioeconomic data that can help us inform and adjust how we engage with our community and find other ways to meet our consumers where they are and deliver programs and services in ways that are going to speak to them the strongest. The second one is using big data to advance decarbonization. And the challenges that I mentioned notwithstanding, I think the CCA community is really at a scale where we can truly leverage the power of numbers and the power of big data to drive new solutions that are ultimately going to get us to this highly decarbonized, highly integrated grid down the future. And just to call out one of our partners, MCE, Clean Energy, pioneered a program with one of their partners, Recurve, to deploy a flex market that is built on using the power of numbers and the power of big data to use a technology agnostic approach to deliver savings to the grid, and when they need it, and paying for those savings only when they occur. And that's just a great example of the type of innovation the data is able to bring into the market. And I think it follows through with the idea that demand may yet be the new supply. And for those of you who were listening earlier, the CAISO chair mentioned that we really do need flexible demand in order to meet our decarbonization goals. And then finally, this is something that I think has been talked about, and it's probably a long path before, or if this ever becomes a thing, but this idea of a centralized data repository for the state, where you can have multiple entities accessing data based on the appropriate permissions, where you can standardize formats, timeliness, the type of the data. And there's still other problems to solve for around that, but that's a great example of a way that we could really advance forward and do a lot in terms of moving solutions forwards and addressing the accuracy and timeliness and quality issues that we currently see in the data environment. So I'm going to leave it there, and I believe I'm going to be passing the stage to Rebecca Fang from Silicon Valley Clean Energy. Rebecca, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Hey, everybody. It's super great to be here. My name is Rebecca Fang, and I'm a data analyst at Silicon Valley Clean Energy. SVCE is a CCA serving around 270,000 customers in Santa Clara County. And like many CCAs, we deal with a large influx of data on a daily basis from sources like Calpine, PG&E, CAISO, among others. So recently, in the last few years, we've come to a conclusion that based on all of the data that we've been receiving, it's only expected to grow both in terms of volume and in terms of the type of data that we're dealing with. And so we saw a need to have a more sophisticated way of managing, cleaning all of that information. So over the last 2 years, we have been transitioning from doing purely flat file storage and local machine computing and moving toward developing a cloud-based data analytics platform, which we're calling DAISY. So similar to EVCE, DAISY is hosted on the Google Cloud Platform, so it uses that entire suite of tools. So for example, BigQuery for data warehousing, GCS for flat file storage, and Data Studio for dashboarding and reporting. And we've noticed that once we had DAISY in place, it was instrumental in not only increasing access to our own data, but also unlocking the types of analyses and the types of insights that we can derive from the data. So, an example would be some strategic analysis that would take maybe hours to days to run on a local machine now takes minutes to run on BigQuery because with cloud computing, you're able to process and merge large and disparate data sets at a much more efficient and faster pace than you could do on your own computer. And so we've noticed that as our data management capabilities have grown, so have opportunities, especially in the realm of program design and implementation. So for this intro, I wanted to touch on 2 such pilots and programs that we've launched. The first is the SVCE Data Hive. So this one is a Green Button Connect platform that allows SVCE customers to provide third parties with secure and authorized access to their energy consumption and billing data. So for example, wanting to install battery storage at their home, they could go through Data Hive and provide the installer with authorized access to their historical electricity consumption data. That way they'd be able to size the installation appropriately. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of data that's involved in running a platform like this, and the Data Hive wouldn't be possible if SVCE and our pilot partners did not have the appropriate data infrastructure to handle this constant and secure accessing of historical data for all of our customers. And the second program I wanted to touch on is called GridShift EV Charging. This is a managed charging app that we offer to our residential EV drivers. GridShift is able to sync to the driver's electricity tariff, typically a time of use rate, and it can optimize their EV charging into the cheapest hours, meaning the off-peak period of their tariff. And then on top of that, it layers a secondary optimization to find the cleanest hours within the off-peak. So the way in which we do that is we actually go through the Data Hive. So when somebody enrolls in GridShift, they go through the Data Hive authorization step. They authorize our program partner, EV Energy, to access their tariff data so that EV Energy can pull that information on a weekly basis and update their rate tariff so that they are continuing to optimize their EV charging appropriately. For this program, we've also leveraged DAISY for things like targeted marketing. So having the ability to merge large data sets like our customer attribute data, DMV data, tax assessor data has allowed us to basically isolate the customer segment that would be eligible for this type of program. So this would be a residential EV driver with an eligible vehicle make and model who likely charges at home. So for example, at a single family home. And so that type of targeted marketing wouldn't have been possible if we were still operating with purely flat file storage. And so that's a very quick overview of some of the quantitatives going on at SVCE. And now I will pass the stage to Scott Rigglesworth from Ascend Analytics.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Rebecca. So this was an exciting panel to be able to join, and I appreciate everybody's attendance to this session. As we work through kind of subject matter here, one thing I wanted to convey is how we find CCAs, our clients, and other LSEs that we work with, how they handle data, because having it, as some of the folks who've gone before me here have mentioned, having it is not necessarily beneficial unless we're doing something with it. So a big question I would pose to all of you is, how are you using the data? What are you going to do with it once you have it? And how are you going to distill it to something meaningful? So if you start on this little journey here, this little cycle, this is a common sort of occurrence with respect to how we at Ascend collect data and do modeling and so forth with our clients. And it usually starts with some decision. Even if we've just arrived on the scene, there's been decisions that have been made about, say, the portfolio of an entity, and the next question is, what's the incremental decision that needs to be made, right? So having ways to capture any transactions that clients have, all the data associated with those PPAs, keeping all that data, getting it as it comes in live, new from a real asset as it comes online. Likewise, as we've touched on, several folks mentioned rates, load forecasting of customers, certainly the expectations of the PPAs and the resources serving the CCA portfolio, and understanding it and modeling it in a meaningful fashion. So what do I mean by that? One of the things that we often run into is we'll engage a client. We'll find that they might be doing some things in Excel. They might be using, say, an average shape or a representative shape for customers or for resource production. It might not actually represent well their sort of intermittency or the volatility. And so having good sound data, quality data, bringing it into a modeling construct, performing analytics, and then taking it through to help a decision maker. So bringing that data down, automating the collection of it so that people don't have to be manipulating it if the computer can do it, and bringing that into a modeling framework. So getting the price data, if you're in the market, you're doing portfolio management, say, having the price data that you need to make real-time decisions in the market, or long-term fundamental forecasts captured and brought in. I know we work with our clients and provide them with our Ascend market intelligence forecasts, feeding the environment, or other folks will have other vendors or capture current price data from ICE, Nodal Exchange, Energy Stream, and bring that into their modeling environment. And then starting to look at how do you actually take the data and use it to inform you. So a good example here on the left is something that we actually did recently with Silicon Valley. It's a chart. You're not going to be able to read it, but I can kind of give you an idea of what it's representing. And really what it's getting at a big picture is a low probability, high impact event, right? So it gets to what happens as market prices change and the impacts on the PCIA. And as we've gone on the journey with Silicon Valley, we've begun to understand, hey, certain things can happen and transpire that change the outlook for the portfolio in the future. So having that data, having a good solid representation of it, and being able to stress it or model it in a pretty robust fashion with uncertainty in the future is a next step to then taking those outputs and then taking them down to something that someone, maybe not somebody who's a data geek, can distill and see and understand quickly and make a decision. So being able to produce reporting and visualizations, as Taj mentioned earlier, is crucial in getting it back to the right people. So what do executives receive and what are board members looking at that are influencing the decision that's made. Certainly, if you gave them lots and lots and lots of data, they might be impressed by the volume of data, but is it something that's been distilled to them for the sake of making a decision? So I'm going to pass it off to the last member of the panel here. And Jackson, you're going to hand it off. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. Hi, everyone. I'm Fred Taylor Hochberg, Director of Modeling at CalCCA. This slide kind of lays out the, I won't say the things that keep me awake at night, but the things that I think a lot about. So we can go kind of problem by problem. So the first problem is, okay, you're a CCA, you're trying to plan serving your customers at a reasonable rate. How do you forecast rates? How do you know how much revenue you're going to get? How do you know if you're going to be competitive with the IOU? This is a complex problem, not just inherently because rates are naturally volatile, but you also don't have perfect information, right? There is a lot of data that would be very useful for CCA forecasting, but it's often not available due to confidentiality or other issues, and I've listed two there on the slide. So contract costs and RA positions are two big thorns in our side in terms of being able to accurately forecast rates. There's obviously the matter of uncertainty around forward pricing, right? I'm sure most of you have seen that gas forwards for next year are much higher than we anticipated. We knew they were going to go up, but they went up more than we thought. And that is having a big impact on bundled gen rates and PCIA rates. So these are both big issues that cause volatility and are hard to plan around, right? If you have to make a decision about what the rates are going to be next year, these shocks and uncertainties make it difficult to do so. Another issue in this kind of bucket is hedging, right? How much do you hedge? Should you be fully hedged or not, like 80%? These are kind of hard decisions to make when, again, much of that information is confidential and you don't have visibility into it. So that's a kind of perpetual problem that we are struggling with. So how do you work around that, right? There's this data you want, you can't get it. What do you do? I will say it is a great time to be in energy data. There's a lot of great public information that we use. For those of you who haven't used EIA's data, I highly recommend it. They have a very well-built API that lets you pull stuff very, very quickly. So there's a lot of helpful sources out there that you can use, and that's one example of them. But at the end of the day, if you want that extra precision, you really need the confidential data, and that's been very hard to get, and it's been like I said, a difficult problem to solve. So, okay, on a related note, this idea of assessing competitiveness, right? Like, let's say you did have perfect information. Well, how do you know if you're going to be competitive with the IOU, right? One of the data sources that we've been doing a lot of work on, and I want to give a shout out to Ben Dawson, who's the analyst on this, who's been doing a truly gigantic amount of very, very cool work on this. There are these many, many, many terabyte giant FERC databases that have contracts and market transactions. These databases are a gold mine, and I say gold mine not only because there's valuable stuff in there, but it's also really hard to get gold, right? You don't just pick gold up. You don't just pick gold up off the ground. It's buried, and you have to do some digging for it. So Ben's been doing a lot of great work digging through that FERC data and seeing what we can glean about how utilities and CCAs and ESPs are positioned in terms of their contracts and their market transaction, and have a better view of the competitive landscape. This is challenging because, like I said, these databases are gigantic. It's very hard to parse and it's very messy. So you need some sort of programmatic solution for it. You can't just poke at it with spreadsheets. You need to be able to really slice and dice it using code. So I want to thank Ben for his work on that. Okay, next issue. So procurement planning. So how do you figure out what to buy, right? How do I figure out which PPAs to sign? How much capacity should I need? What contract should I enter? And is it going to keep the grid reliable? So I'm pleased to announce that we at CalCCA are spinning up our Plexos modeling shop. We're actually making a new hire who's starting next week to help us get Plexos up and running and start participating more deeply in the conversations at the PUC and elsewhere about this. So as I'm sure you all know, modeling is a key part of the IRP and RA process. The CPUC does it, CAISO does it, the CEC does it, and for a while we wanted to have a seat at the table. And having this model up and running will really help us with that. It'll really help us influence the debate more, and just get a better outcome for everyone, right? Because modeling is big, it's complicated. The more eyes on the result, the better, especially when the result is, hundreds of billions of dollars. So just flagging that. Finally, what I call the elephant in the room issue is climate change, right? I want to thank John Martindale. John's been doing a very, very heavy lift, just doing a very broad lit review of how grid operation is projected to change in the next 10, 20 years using climate data, right? So climate change means that the grid is going to operate differently. You're going to have different thermal D rates. You're going to have different amounts of hydro availability. And being able to robustly quantify that is really important. It's something that is already to some extent incorporated into the IRP and RA and other processes, but it hasn't received a kind of robust, holistic look using all the data and literature that's out there. So John, I want to thank John for spearheading that effort. There's a lot out there, and we look forward to to showing everyone what we got once we have stuff to share. So great, that is it. Thank you, and I guess I will step off and we'll head to the Q&A session.
All right, we're all back, I believe. So that was exciting. Thank you, everybody, for your introduction. What's really exciting for me is to see how much more depth there is in terms of data and analytics in the CCA space than there was when I attended this very first conference, I think back in 2017, where it was obviously a topic that people were interested in, but not necessarily something that CCAs had really dug into. So it's really exciting to see all of the work that's going on in here. So thank you for everybody who submitted questions in the Q&A portion of the application in the audience. Feel free to keep adding some questions. We're going to try and get to all the questions that we have. We don't have too many, so we also have certain topics that I thought would be worthwhile to touch on as a group, and I'll try and get this conversation going. So yeah, as I said, it's exciting to see that there's all this work going on in data and CCAs, and we did have a question from Devin Murphy posed earlier this morning, which was, I thought, a really good place to start. And his question is, what type of infrastructure do CCAs need to build in order to remain competitive and data-driven for the next decade? And to expand on that, really, I think maybe we could start to talk a little bit about what should CCAs who are starting out in the space, or who may not have, maybe established a data and analytics practice, what are some of the suggestions that we have for them? And what's the type of staffing that they should be thinking about if they're putting together that infrastructure? So I want to open that to the panel. I want to share that for me, I think that the key message that I want to send everybody is that Excel is not enough. I think Excel is the tool in the utility industry that everybody loves to go to, and it can do fabulous, wonderful things. But running a CCA through only things that are operated in Excel really is missing a huge opportunity, especially given where data technologies are today. So my word of advice is think beyond Excel, and I'll pass it on to the panel to see if there's any comments or thoughts that people have. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Thanks. Yeah, speaking as part of a CCA that kind of went through this process more recently in the last 1 or 2 years, a couple of things that were important to us in developing DAISY were making sure the platform was flexible and extensible enough to kind of carry us in the next, however many years, as not only our volume of data grows, but as we encounter new data sets, as our physical resources come online, and we're just dealing with a lot more data than we had been in the last few years. So thinking about will the platform be able to handle new types of data, new volumes of data in a time and cost-effective manner? That was especially important to us. Another piece is we're working with a third-party, Camus Energy, to develop DAISY. And so the way we've been developing it is in an iterative process, so working in 2-week release cycles. And that has been really important for us because it allows us to kind of pivot depending on our priorities for what data we're ingesting, what analyses we need to run in that time. And it also allows us to kind of take it back to our internal stakeholders and make sure that the platform is being built in a way that is kind of usable for the target audience.
Great. Any other thoughts? Maybe Josh, if you don't mind, if I can put you on the spot a little bit. You've worked with a lot of CCAs, and I think the offering that Calpine has to its CCAs has grown and matured over time. What are some of the things that you're seeing being really important today as opposed to maybe 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think so. I really like how Rebecca framed it, which is a couple things. One, that the approach to the development is important. So, it sounds like, Rebecca, your team is running on an agile type development format, which I think is super smart. I think you need to be able to, as you're making these decisions, pivot and adjust to business needs. And that is how we do our development as well. But pulling back from that one, so I think one thing we've learned and we've been working on as we've moved forward with our platform is really understanding the use cases that you're developing for. There are distinctly different audiences within any CCA, and so what you're deploying, how you're deploying it, and the user experience around that really needs to reflect that end user. And so from the CCA perspective, I imagine that, or at least the advice I give is that you need to have solutions for people like me, where Excel is great, but if I had to do something beyond Excel, I'm not going to be a whole lot of help to you, right? So I'm your layman user. But I do think CCAs need, those data scientists and those people who are comfortable in things like SQL or other, more database type technologies, because you really have, huge amounts of data at your fingertips, and there's a lot you can do with it, but you need staff who know how to manipulate, manage, and utilize that data in all the variety of ways that it's being made available to you.
Right. Fred or Scott, before we move on, any final thoughts? Otherwise, there's plenty of questions popping up, so I'm happy to keep moving.
Yeah, this conversation is making me think about this tricky trade-off between, when you decide to automate something, right? Like, there's an inflection point past which it does make sense to automate a thing. We do it a lot. A lot of people consume the result. It's time consuming to do it manually, and there's repetitive steps. That to me is then you should definitely automate it, right? The problem is a lot of the stuff I found is in that kind of middling space where it's like, well, we could automate it, but if we do so, there's going to be issues that we might find along the way, and it may be an overbuilt solution to the problems that we were trying to solve. So that's always the tricky part, right? Is that, and this is bread and butter for product manager types, is figuring out what it makes sense to bake into the code, what it makes sense to automate. What it makes sense, how good it needs to be, right? How good, how much you need to test it, how much you need to do QC on it versus just having something off the shelf that's good enough. So I will flag that as, and I'm sure everyone here is aware, that is a problem that any organization that deals with large data. You have to prioritize work, figure out what it makes sense to automate and what it doesn't, and what makes sense for your own workflows. So.
Yeah, that totally resonates with me. And the other thing that I think I would recommend folks that are starting to look at building a data practice in the CCA space is to really keep up with how technology is changing. In particular, the things, we started off, again, with the Google Cloud Platform back in 2017, and where it is today is leap years ahead of where it was back in 2017. So there's a lot of things that seem like they're not feasible, like aggregating the load of 600,000 customers hour by hour, that didn't seem that easily feasible in the past, that now with new technology are actually extremely easy to do and are no longer a challenge that we all might have thought of was like, well, that's maybe not a problem that I want to tackle. So I'll leave it at that. We have some really interesting questions about coming through about the data quality, and data access, which is right up the alley of this conversation. One question is about what from our perspective, what framework, either regulatory, legislative, should the CCAs utilize to solve the various challenges associated with the lack of timely and accurate data delivery from the IOUs? And a corollary question to that is, what types of data quality control processes are we running against the data that we receive from the IOUs? So those are two questions I think would be worth for us to chat about. Any thoughts on the first part? I'll say this. I acknowledge that it's a problem and it needs a solution. We are dealing with data quality, not just data quality issues, but we're also dealing as CCAs with data that is not deemed essential for us to receive in order to operate, even though clearly it is. And so this is a challenge, and I think all of us as panelists, we've discussed this. This is a challenge. So let's put our brains together and talk about, how do we think the best way to approach or address those challenges are?
So I'm a bigger picture sort of thinker like Josh, and I don't get into the weeds on my end of my job, but I have worked at a utility, and I've worked for a retailer and understand a lot that comes with all the data that there is. And I could say, for as many times as I've worked with an analyst that has provided data and said, this is the data, this is what the data says, but it doesn't even pass the highest level sniff test, it's always great to start with, does this make sense, right? Is what we're looking at make sense? So even if you have all of the tools to scrub it, slice it, dice it, you have to be constantly validating it with people with industry experience and expertise to know whether there is something there that might need to be filtered out or examined more closely. So.
While you're gathering your thoughts, rest of the panel, one of the solutions to this problem is to really demonstrate to the regulatory and legislative bodies what the challenges are that are posed by this lack of access to the data or this lack of quality in the data. EBC participated in conversations with the CPUC after the August rolling blackouts that we all experienced in California in 2020, because a report from the ISO indicated that, amongst other issues, inaccurate forecasts contributed to the rolling blackouts. In a sense, there was an underestimate of what the actual load would be. And that opened up the conversation to the fact that in order to generate very accurate forecasts, you need really good recent data about your system, right? And you need to know what happened yesterday if you're in the middle of a 3-day wave in order to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. And unfortunately, CCAs are currently not given access to data that in such a timely manner. And so that was an opportunity which we, I don't know that we were entirely successful, but we at least opened the conversation with the CPUC as to and Josh was part of that conversation as well, of, this is why we can't forecast accurately, because the data that we are needing to generate the forecast, which, by the way, California spent, I think at least $1 billion on the infrastructure to provide that data. We still don't have access to it. So my constructive advice there is to find those opportunities to identify use cases where getting access to better data would mean being able to operate more efficiently. We've made the case, I think, as CCAs to the utility and in the PG&E utility, that getting access to gas data makes sense because we're trying to design programs. And even though we don't deliver gas, we do, and PG&E, has been providing us gas data. But those are the types of use cases I think are worth looking into. Other thoughts?
Just on the framework perspective, I don't think there's one framework. I think you do need to work through and manage all of those things. I think in some cases you're going to find yourself in need of a legislative approach because the regulatory framework doesn't exist, or it's archaic or needs to be updated. But in other cases, I think an active engagement in the regulatory framework. For example, there's the click-through proceeding that's currently, I believe, is still underway. Which is an important one as it relates to a variety of things in data access, and will hopefully establish a path to improvement for how we're getting data in some of the other IOU territories. I think that active and likely proactive strategy on multiple fronts is going to be important for us to really solve this issue.
Yeah, to add on to what Josh has said, I think a valuable tool in the arsenal is to really show that you've really considered and exhausted all other options before you say, hey, IOUs, we really need this data, because just based on our experience with the CPUC and the IOUs, if you come to them and say, hey, we have this problem, we need data X to do thing Y, we can't get data X, the first thing they're going to ask you is, can you use another source that's just as good, or have you tried something else? So I think it's important to show that you've done your homework and you really can't make headway without this. I think that shows that you've done everything you can, and that I think helps you make your case. If you said, hey, look, I've really tried all this stuff, I'm really banging my head against the wall here, and we really need this. I think that's just building up that experience, that paper trail is very valuable in my mind.
Yeah.
Josh, without putting you on the spot, there's two questions I think you can answer for us pretty quickly. One is, you have obviously experience with a lot of the utility IOU data. So can you tell us a little bit what Calpine does in terms of quality checks on the data, and what are the types of things that you're looking to do? And then another question that was asked for you, which I can probably help answer, was someone says, Ruth says, my understanding is that IOUs are required to provide real-time data to the CCAs, but they don't. Why is that? It's the question for Josh. I'm happy to help you answer that question, but I just wanted to tee those two up for you.
So I'll touch on the first one real quick here. So we have, just to manage the IOU data, we have, I want to say it's 54 control areas that span, that span both our IT infrastructure and our operational infrastructure. And that covers everything from, meter usage, cash receipts, the EDI transactions, the SQB submissions, user permissioning, opt actions, customer list and data control. And within each of those control areas, we've got numerous individual controls associated with that one. So, the number there is going to be, we have hundreds, probably getting towards 1,000 or more, depending on how you break it down, controls that are all built around managing the data environment and the various issues that come with the utility data. Taj, I'd love to hear you lead off on the real time. I have thoughts and perspective, but I think CCAs are a little bit closer to this than we are.
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure about the requirements for providing data. I can tell you this: a smart metering system is not designed to be a real-time system. So I don't believe that there's a requirement to provide real-time data. I think the requirement may be to provide the granular data, meaning the 15-minute or the hourly data, once it's collected and made available, and to make it available as quickly as possible. But I don't know if that's a requirement. To be honest, we receive, if you are a CCA in the PG&E service territory, you receive that data from PG&E as part of a program called Share My Data. You receive it within 2 or 3 days of when the data is made available for all the meters that are made available. But it's not provided to us as a must deliver. It's provided to us as a nice to have. That's the way we are getting it. It's and it's certainly very good and useful to receive that data. So I'm not aware of a requirement that they must provide it. I believe, and I don't know that there would be any sort of ability to provide any of this data in real time on a mass scale. But certainly I would very much support any sort of effort to say that we need to do a better job in California to provide CCAs with near real-time metering information for the use case that I just mentioned, for us to be able to more accurately forecast our load, for instance.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, this gets to one of the points I made about this sort of disparate and unequal access to data. So PG&E, you're getting data probably best case, you're getting a good portion of the data at the T+2 or T+3, 2 or 3 days after power flow. And then Taj, I think you've given a great statistic in some of your previous presentations, which is somewhere around T+5, you're like 99% or so of the data, and that's what we see. If you are not in PG&E, then you're only getting the data through the billing transactions, which really means you're at, probably 30, 35 days after power flows when you finally understand the totality of what happened on any given trade day. So it is not real time. And the more exogenous events that we experience, which climate change is really great at exacerbating, the harder it is for us to take, historical data and use that as a predictor for what is currently happening, which is what we have to do right now in short-term forecasting, right? We have to look back and say, show me a similar day, and I'm going to use that as my best case. But, exogenous events continue to drive. And then you add into that things that are such as public safety power shutoffs, where you might have a combination of extreme events with a high energy usage that could drive blackouts or brownouts on top of de-energizations. And then you have no idea what's going on, right? And so you could be just completely exposed to market prices. You could be long, you could be short, but you can look at Texas and the number of agencies that went bankrupt because of what they experienced in that winter storm, right? So it is a real issue, and everything I'm aware of is that there is not a requirement for real-time access. And the utilities at this point in time, it's a tension of providing things like that to do the CCAs versus doing other stuff for their own systems that support other things that they're doing.
Great, thank you, Josh. I'm gonna switch gears now. There's a question that was upvoted 3 times, so that's a question we definitely want to answer. And if there's a question that you want to pose the panel, please put it into the Q&A section. And if you see a question in there you want to upvote it. So this question is for both you and I, Rebecca. It's how do we approach the make versus buy, i.e. in-house versus outsourced question for data and system needs, like for load and rate forecasting, rate setting, CRM and billing program design, and marketing? Which trends do we see? So I'm going to let you take that question first, if you don't mind, Rebecca.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So that's a great question, and something that we definitely grappled with for the second iteration of DAISY, our data analytics platform. So around, I would say a year ago, we were wrapping up the development of the first iteration, so DAISY 1.0, and we were kind of at a crossroads. So we had kind of a high-level idea of what sort of data sets we were expecting to ingest into the second iteration, and what types of use cases we wanted to integrate, like load forecasting, customer segmentation, et cetera. So there was a question of, do we want to try to do this in-house? Do we want to work with a third party again for the second iteration, or do we want to kind of do a mix of both? And we didn't have all the answers. So what we did was we released an RFI, a request for information, about the different data analytics platform tools and development services that were out there. And the responses that we received were kind of across the board, from like an off-the-shelf type tool that you could just initialize quite quickly, to a very customized, like consultative service type development approach. And so that was really informative for us. And we ended up going with working with a third party, not so much an off-the-shelf solution, because we felt that some of the solutions that we saw in the RFI were not quite everything. It didn't quite meet all of the requirements that we had for DAISY 2.0. And so that's why we went with the more customized approach to work with a third party. And I think one reason why we didn't do it in-house is we recognized kind of the lack of bandwidth, and also the lack of complete staff expertise to spin up something like a DAISY type platform on Google Cloud.
Yeah, I think that's really great insights, because I think different CCAs are a different place on the spectrum and have different different staffing levels, et cetera. For EBCE, we really initiated the process by building the basic infrastructure on our own because we wanted to have control over that basic infrastructure. And then we have continued to expand that by hiring other people. That's not necessarily the only way for CCAs to do it. Obviously, I think the main advice that I would provide any CCA is that whether it's the build or buy approach that you take, make sure that if you buy, you do not get locked in to a system or a process that forces you to continue to pay a license fee or a subscription fee in order for you to have access to that data. The moment you go in that direction, then you find yourself kind of effectively locked out of your own data if you decide not to pursue the engagement with the partner you've selected. So in our approach, we've made sure that we manage and control the basic infrastructure, and we brought in partners at multiple levels for very specific solutions. So for example, our very short-term load forecast is being handled by a partner, Mist.ai, that excels at doing short-term time series load forecasting. And so they play very nicely with our infrastructure. The data exchangers are seamless, and we're very happy to work with the third party there because we don't want to invest the resources in trying to really become experts at short-term load forecasting. We've done the same thing with other partners, but the point was always for us to never take our whole entire data and have it locked out. When it comes to the CRM, the customer relationship management decision, that's one where we made it very clear immediately that we needed to have ownership of the license of the CRM system. And the CRM system is ultimately the central system of record for transactions with a customer. And having that be owned and licensed and managed by a third party is inherently problematic in our opinion. Now, that's not to say that we don't work with organizations like in Calpine's organization. We work with another company, which is the CCA group at SMUD, and they do provide very large end-to-end solutions for billing and call center management. But we still have our own platform so that we can have control and access and not be locked out of our own data. And I'm happy to have Scott, Josh, Fred, add any sort of insights they have in here, even though this was directed at the CCAs.
I think that this is just coming from the perspective of a vendor, right? Because obviously we're interested in serving CCAs, and we have been party to many conversations with folks trying to make these decisions. I think the telling thing is most often that the ramp up, right, is the decision to what do we need, how fast can we build the capabilities, what's the short-term goal, what's the intermediate, what's the long-term objective. So I think those are all prudent decisions when it comes time to decide where are we going and what are the choices we're going to make.
I would just add that I couldn't agree more with Taj's point that and it gets back to the point about, really the grid is moving towards a digitized, democratized, decentralized, decarbonized environment. Data is going to be critical to that, and access to that data, making that available when you need it, where you need it, and to answer the questions you need to answer is critical. And so that needs to flow through all the things that we as vendors do that support the CCAs. And I think that as CCAs make decisions, I think the more that that's kept in frame, I think the more successful we're going to be in the future and with our overall policy objectives.
Right. There's one question that was upvoted, and I want to give it its due. I don't know the answer, but I'll put it out there. Is there an ongoing effort which can help overcome the barrier of Rule 24 authorization for CCA customers in order to enroll in DR programs? Rebecca, I think you know a little bit more about this than I do.
So I'm afraid I don't fully understand kind of the barrier that's being referred to. So I'd appreciate it if there's any clarification, possibly from the person who had asked the question. Taj, I don't know if you have any more context.
Yeah, I don't have much more context. I mean, for us, it's mostly a data exchange barrier that we have in the sense that we need to get data from PG&E about who's enrolled in a DR program to make sure that we don't let customers double dip, if you will, because they could curtail a megawatt and they're enrolled in one program, and then we give them credit for the same megawatt that they curtailed for another program. That's the only barrier that I'm aware of. So I don't know, Josh, if maybe you have any more context on that.
Yeah, I mean, I can maybe guess at some of it, which is that once again, you do have unequal access on Rule 24 across different IOUs. So you do have a problem where, especially if you're a DR provider crossing more than one service territory, that Rule 24 barrier can be fairly significant for you in terms of getting access. I think the double dipping is another interesting point to address there, and it also really depends on what you're doing, because you don't necessarily. I could be wrong in this one, so allow me to correct this in the future. But I think you can still get access to Rule 24 data without taking that customer into a CAISO market bid. And so you could have a desire to utilize Rule 24 to get access to certain data for things you're doing that don't roll up into a CAISO DR bid, which that double dipping may become less relevant depending on the nature of the activity that you're engaged in with that customer. I know that, to my previous point, the click-through proceeding was hoping to address some of this, but there is a lot of challenges, and just one of them was experienced in the Edison territory, where in their platform transition they just shut down data to the DR providers for, I think, a couple months, which is it's a pretty tough pill to swallow when you're trying to provide services to the grid and to the market.
Just to add on the question of the double dipping, I have an anecdote from our GridShift EV charging program. So as part of that program, we run events in which we reward participants for shifting their charging away from or towards certain periods of time. And so we had in mind the idea that we wouldn't want to dual reward somebody for the same action of shifting their charging one time. And so the Rule 24 DR participation data was incredibly important for us to make sure we're putting customers in the correct cohort, meaning if they were already enrolled in a third-party DR program, they wouldn't be eligible to earn additional rewards from GridShift. And actually, we had received notification from PG&E that they were discontinuing the Rule 24 reporting, at least for our CCA. And so we were looking into alternatives on how we can get that data in an automated fashion. And so we ended up going through the CAISO Demand Response Registration System, DRS. We got certified access to that database, and it actually turned out to be a worthwhile pursuit because CAISO has various APIs that you can access. And so we're now looking into integrating that into our data warehouse so that we can pull that data in an automated fashion rather than processing like weekly reports in a spreadsheet format.
Great, thank you. Interesting topic there. I think we have a few more minutes. I believe we have until 4:05. So I'll try and tackle one question by Leslie. Leslie Brown asks, CPUC just issued a PD for RTP rate for commercial EV. How likely is it that PG&E is going to be able to figure out the real-time data delivery issue to make billing for that tariff possible? I'll attempt to answer that question with the knowledge that I have, which is incomplete. My comment earlier about real-time data was about real-time load data. So real-time price data, that's something that certainly can be made more easily accessible. Real-time load data, if you want to put somebody on a real-time pricing rate, you need to provide them potentially both the load signal and the price signal so that they can understand what their cost is, right? Quantity times price equals the cost. So the price data you can get real time pretty easily. Probably you'll provide the real time price from ISO. The load data there, that's a really important question. A standard smart meter isn't capable out of the box of providing real time information. It can be configured, and some of them can be configured. So it's possible that the meters will be configured for those people that participate in the program to provide data at much higher frequencies and more near real-time basis. Because my comment earlier was that as a bulk, the millions of customers on PG&E's smart metering system are not reporting data on a real-time basis. They're being centralized. So there is the possibility that they do something to the meters for those particular customers, or there's the possibility that they install different metering or different devices, even devices that can talk to the meter using a Zigbee protocol or something like that, and provide that information locally to the customer. And with that, it's 4:05. I want to thank everybody on the panel. Thank you so much for your input. I want to thank everybody in the audience for your questions. Sorry if we couldn't get to all of your questions, but we had some really good ones. And yeah, I think you're going to be directed to the next step, which I don't remember what it is. So I'm just going to let the screen tell you what you should do next. But again, thank you very much to our panel, and thank you to the audience. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.